Hello and welcome. This is part one of a two-part interview with our guest, Special Agent Scown from the local office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Agent Scown, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me today.
How long have you been with the FBI?
Just a little more than 12 years so far.
I see. And what was your motivation 12 years ago to join the FBI?
Well, I've always been interested in service jobs. I was in the military for a little while as well, and I just wanted to be able to serve the United States. And also, I studied accounting in school, and I really wanted to be able to put that education to work in investigating fraud matters.
It just seemed like a good fit, and one thing led to another.
Yeah, I was fortunate to get picked up.
Excellent. Well, our subject today is money laundering, and perhaps we could start with a definition of money laundering from the FBI's standpoint.
Well, money laundering can be pretty broad, but basically it's any time someone uses their ill-gotten gains, takes their ill-gotten gains and tries to move it through the financial system or through alternate systems to try to get it to a place where they can use it without law enforcement detecting it.
I see.
So if someone has money that they've stolen, then obviously they have to worry about the FBI or another law enforcement agency eventually tracing it and finding it. So the more complexity they can introduce to their laundering scheme, the safer they feel in us not finding those funds at a later time.
How does money laundering work? Can you give us kind of maybe an example of the process? How would one go about disguising the use of these funds?
There's a lot of different ways. It can be as simple as just one level where the bad guy gets money into their account and then transfers it to another account, rather. But it can also get pretty complex where they use international money mule networks or virtual currencies to try to disguise the funds and make it more difficult for law enforcement to trace. What we're seeing the most of right now that we find the most concerning is the use of money mule networks by both domestic and international fraud groups. And what those folks do, what they use money mules for, is to move money all throughout the United States and then have the final money mule send that money to the overseas fraudster. And oftentimes when someone is a victim of a scam, they're less likely to send money overseas to a bad guy as they are to someone in the United States. And so a fraudster will recruit a money mule inside the United States to put their victim at ease.
You use the term money mule. Does that suggest that they physically transport the funds from one area to another, or they move it electronically, or both?
It could be both, but typically it's electronically. So often what happens is someone who is a money mule, and as an aside, a money mule can either be witting or unwitting, meaning they either know that they're involved in a scam or they're completely unaware and they're being victimized themselves. But oftentimes they'll be contacted by a fraudster who will ask them to receive funds into their own bank account and then either transfer those funds to the bad guy or to another money mule through a wire transfer or through MoneyGram or Western Union, other money service businesses, or go and purchase gift cards that they then provide the gift card information to the fraudster.
Based on your earlier comment, I sense that the FBI is not the only agency responsible for law enforcement of money laundering. Who are some of the other agencies that you would work with?
Well, on a federal level, we work very closely with the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Group, IRSCI. We work extensively with them. We also work with the United States Postal Inspection Service and just other federal agencies as well as we try to combat this threat.
Can you give us some particular signs that our viewers, that all of us should be sensitive to, that would indicate the possibility of a laundering effort?
Well, any time that you're asked to be involved in a transaction that you really aren't a party to, or it doesn't make sense for you to be involved in that transaction, that should give people a lot of pause. And that's really what happens with these money mules that we encounter. They are asked to receive money and then send it to somebody else, but there's really no business purpose for them to be involved in the transaction. And so anytime you come across that, people should be aware and probably reach out to law enforcement for guidance.
Can you Give us an idea how money laundering would impact real estate. Why would real estate be a method of laundering money?
Well, obviously, if real estate holds value typically, and
Indeed.
so for ill-gotten gains, if money can be put into real estate, at least for a period of time, it can be very useful to both maintain value and then to clean those funds. But a lot of what we're seeing is as well right now, as I mentioned before, is the issue with in real estate transactions, people being sent emails saying, "Hey, send your money. We need to send the money right now. Send it to this with this different wiring information,"
Hmm.
and then that turns into being fraudulent wiring information, and people lose those funds. And as I mentioned before, business email compromise. That's typically what we refer to
Sure.
that as.
Does the size of real estate, meaning more zeros, it's an expensive asset, does that have a tendency to attract potential scamsters just because of the sheer size?
Well, absolutely. Real estate's a huge industry. In addition to that,
Indeed.
there can be significant fluctuations, which is attractive to people engaging in fraud schemes as
Mhm.
well.
Do you feel there's a degree of progress that the law enforcement agencies, all of them, are making headway in terms of controlling this, or is it still a pretty difficult challenge that will continue to face law enforcement for maybe years to come?
It's certainly going to continue to be an issue. The reason for that is as we discover the ways that bad guys are laundering their funds or are committing different kinds of fraud, they come up with new and even more sophisticated ways to do their bad deeds.
Mhm.
And so we have to learn those new ways they're doing it. Obviously, virtual currency is a new way that bad guys use to launder their funds or commit different fraud schemes. And so we, as law enforcement, we continue to evolve to their new procedures just as they continue to develop new procedures. Um, I think the key to us as Americans to overcoming fraud, and as we talked earlier about, was just the importance of education.
Mhm.
We have to make sure that folks understand what warning signs to look for. And like I mentioned before, just asking questions to make sure you understand the purpose of transactions that you're involved in. And doing those things will really help to reduce fraud in the United States and reduce losses to
Mhm.
victims.
When you investigate a situation and that results in a conviction for money laundering, what actually happens to the resources that could be millions and millions of dollars? What happens to those funds?
That's a great question. Basically, when we're seizing funds from someone who has stolen those funds from somebody else, that's evidence of a crime. After the case is adjudicated and everything's figured out, those funds get returned by the courts back to the victims. So we're always looking as criminal investigators to do two things. One thing we want to do is we want to gather evidence to put somebody in prison for breaking the law.
Mhm.
And we also want to be able to seize and forfeit assets to try to make victims as whole as we possibly can.
I see. Is there a particular case that is unique that kind of stands out in your mind, either because of the layering or the dollar amount or the people involved that you can tell us about?
Well, yeah, I'll tell you a story about a case, but first I just want to mention how once again how damaging these networks can be. And so if any of your viewers either talk to somebody who potentially could be involved in one of these things or that they suspect, they really should get them in touch with law enforcement because both the money mule themselves is being victimized and they're being used by overseas bad guys to victimize other people.
Mhm.
Kind of one of the more interesting things that we see is these romance scams where folks really are not just being victimized financially and also being used as money mules, but they're being victimized emotionally too. It's really very, very sad, and it's becoming more and more common once again as we continue to have more and more interactions with people online. Whereas it's really difficult for your neighbor to steal from you, it's not difficult for you to meet any number of people online who'd be willing to steal from you
Mhm.
and don't have any kind of scruples. So, you know, romance scams are, you know, some of the saddest crimes that I see as a fraud investigator.
Indeed.
Certainly violent crime matters can have a lot more physical damage that people deal with and are horrific and very sad. But as far as fraudulent fraud investigations, I would say romance scams are the saddest ones that we're seeing right now. One, because of the emotional and financial damage, but also because of the level of trust that these fraudsters develop with their victims. They often bleed them of everything that they have, as opposed to if someone invests in a company that's fraudulent and maybe they lose a large amount of money, but it's not all their money. These fraudsters that run these romance scams will take money from the victim until the victim literally has no more money to send.
Right.
And so it's
That's very
just
sad.
it's very sad.
One final question. If our viewers suspect or feel like there's any type of activity that could be related to money laundering, what do you suggest they do?
Well, they need to find out as much about the transaction as they can and then reach out to law enforcement. We'd be happy to talk to them here with the FBI, or if they want to reach out to their local law enforcement as well, that can be very useful also. Additionally, there's a lot of great resources on our internet fraud website, ic3.gov, that contains information both on fraud schemes, including money laundering, and also contains information on how to file a complaint with the FBI.
Well, that's very interesting information. Thank you so much, Agent Scown, for being with us. And if you feel like you're subject to any type of money laundering activity, please refer to the websites that have been mentioned earlier or contact the local office at the FBI. Thanks for watching Real Estate Essentials, brought to you by Ambition. We want to thank today's guest. And don't forget to leave a comment in the section below. I'm Gary Barnes, and we'll see you next time.